what is the Oakland Peace Center? And I watched your video, so I know, but for the purposes of our audience.
Sure. So the Oakland Peace Center is a collective of 40 different organizations who are all working to create peace in lots of different ways. Some of them are doing direct service work, providing food and clothing for people in need. Some of them are doing policy shift work to create more access to housing for all, or to make sure that workers get paid a fair wage, or making sure that immigrants get taken care get treated with dignity. Some of them are doing culture shift work, trying to build up communities that are grounded in empathy, that are grounded in accountability to people on the margins. And some of them are doing inner peace work so that people in the midst of the chaos and the violence around them have a core they can turn to. So people who are teaching yoga and meditation and mindfulness in at-risk schools and in prisons and in cancer wards. But the thing that brings them all together across all of those disparate ways of addressing issues of creating peace and reducing violence is a commitment to recognizing the underlying causes of violence and responding to those by building up a community of equity, access, and dignity for all people, creatures, and creation as the way of creating peace in the Bay Area. Because all of these folks have been doing really remarkable work and have all learned the lesson that until we're addressing the economic violence that is done to poor folks, until we address the violence that is being done to our planet, until we recognize the violence that is inherent in our safety systems, we'll never create peace in a true, lasting way that is actually for all people.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And how did you get started with this? Because you founded the
So I'm the founder of the Oakland Peace Center, not out of any deep and driving desire to run a nonprofit, but I was pastoring a very small congregation with a very big building. And the congregation didn't necessarily have a ton of energy to create new programs. But the thing is, there are very few longtime Oakland residents who haven't been directly touched by violence and the impact of losing people in the streets, losing people to the system. And so the thing that all of us shared was an awareness that the current situation of violence in Oakland at the time was something we were feeling called to do something about, but we didn't have the energy to do anything about it on our own. And in one of the most expensive places in the country to live, we had 40,000 square feet of space.
Wow.
Desperately needed. Yeah, it's huge. A 1929 facility, beautiful, deteriorating, but beautiful.
And that is it owned by the church or something?
It is. It was owned by the church. It is for the next few months still owned by the church. And so we said, so we got a bunch of nonprofit organizations together, folks who were really on the front lines, who were showing up in the moments after people got shot to make sure that that nobody was engaged in retaliatory violence, which is a real thing. People who were creating retreats to take care of the spiritual well-being of activists and caretakers. Because being on the front lines of this work is exhausting. Folks who were doing policy work to reduce violence and to create economic opportunity. We got a bunch of them together and said, would there be value to you in having a shared space and greater opportunities to collaborate? And there was a resounding yes to that. And there were about a dozen of them when we got together in 2009. We launched in 2012, and now we've got over 40 partners who are working together.
Wow. And they're all in that space or no?
12 of them are in that space.
Okay.
And some of them also use our event space occasionally for trainings, for, but a large number of them are there just for the opportunity to be working in partnership and solidarity and getting a chance to cross-pollinate. Because what happens if the guy who does what happens if the woman who's running the food and clothing program as a way of reducing violence in her community, because her son was shot in our neighborhood, and she wants to make sure that everybody has their basic needs met so no one needs to turn to violence. What happens if she's working alongside the guy who's running SOS Juice, which is teaching people in West and East Oakland about organic food as medicine, and actually using the medicine from the earth as a form of resistance to the food industrial complex, I think is what he calls it. What happens if they're working together so that poor folks' basic needs are getting met, and they get to be a part of a movement for holistic healing as well, which is something that usually is only people who can afford to shop at Lululemon get to benefit from. What happens if they're collaborating? What happens if the immigrant justice folks and the Black Lives Matter folks and the folks who are working to increase the minimum wage so that people in the most expensive rental place in the country can afford to stay where they have grown up? What if they begin to collaborate? And what if they're working with the folks who are doing yoga so that their spirits and souls are getting taken care of at the same time that they're dismantling these systems that are designed to hurt people on the margins? That's kind of the dream.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic dream. I'm drooling over here. This is this is always, when I worked in the nonprofit sector, I always thought, like, come on, let's collaborate. It's so competitive in many ways, right? And people were competing for the same funding, and people are very protective of their work, but it just works against the system to do it that way.
Well, and the system's designed that way, I think. As long as we're pitted against each other, as long as we're competing for the same funds, as long as we're seeing each other as a challenge to our work getting done instead of collaborators in the work, then the folks with the real resources, the folks who could be solving these problems, don't have to. So yeah, I think that there's something kind of powerful about us rejecting that paradigm. Now, the thing that it does require, and I think people often ask, how do people end up becoming OPC partners? And there's some official things that have to happen, but one of the very unofficial elements is none of our partner organizations are very ego-driven. They're all much more about getting the work done than getting their brand attached to it.
Okay.
They're much more, and most of them, while they don't think it's necessarily possible in our lifetime, are functioning with a goal of how do we create a world in which this organization no longer has to exist, which is a very different philosophy than sometimes nonprofits get sucked into. I think they all start out that way. Many of them start out that way, and very often at some point begin to unconsciously get to a place of how do we preserve ourselves, how do we preserve our staff, instead of how do we eliminate the problem we're seeking to solve.
Yeah, I think it's I totally agree, and I've experienced that firsthand. I think it's very rare when an organization is like, you know what, we're good here, like it's, or this isn't working anymore, or whatever, it's time to make a major change, and let's merge with another organization, or let's just say, we did great work while we could, and there's 20 other organizations doing the same thing. Yeah. And how do you how do you promote the collaboration? I mean, okay, so you look for organizations that aren't ego driven, and that's probably a whole nother conversation, how you figure that one out, but and then how do you promote collaboration?
So we do have events where we bring partners together. One of the most beautiful ones recently was we actually had a 3-day retreat. About a dozen folks were able to come to, coincidentally right after the election. And so it ended up being kind of a soul restoring space to be during that period, where some of us were in pretty significant grief or fear even, about what this meant for the people we were working with, all of whom were at greater risk because of the policies that were being advocated by the incoming administration. And to be able to come together and vision what it would look like at the local level and what it meant for us to be the community that could be a model for the rest of the country was kind of the vision that emerged out of that. So yeah, we get together periodically, sometimes just to get to learn more about each other's work, and sometimes with a more intentional, how do we start really collaborating together. We're working on doing a day-long visioning retreat this summer. So we do get together periodically. Usually no more than half of the partners at one time, because that's a lot of folks' schedules to be managing, but usually somewhere between a third and a half of the partners at any given event.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm kind of having this envious moment because I'm on the East Coast. But if next time I'm out in the Bay Area, I'm definitely gonna.
I would love that.
See what's going on.
Yeah.
So tell me, you talked a little bit about it, but I think one of the things that people who want to make an impact in the world they start by seeing a problem. So what was the problem that you saw in the beginning? Because you said you started Oakland Peace Center about 5 years ago, is that correct?
Yeah, our official launch, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary over MLK weekend. And so like I said, I mean, this is the thing, is the problem as it manifests has changed since we first started envisioning this. In the earliest days, before we launched, I think we started talking about this in 2009, and the problem was violence in the streets and the lack of opportunity that led to that violence.
Okay.
By the time we launched, it was also the lack of opportunities for longtime Oakland residents in the emerging economy in Oakland. So Oakland was beginning to see a turnaround, seeing people wanting to move back in. The foreclosure crisis was readjusting itself, and a lot of the opportunities that were emerging in the community were not going to benefit longtime residents.
Right.
So the hopelessness, I think, by the time we launched was a real part of what we were responding to. And now it's just the flat out gentrification and displacement crisis. So like I said, I find myself talking a lot more about the economic violence that's being done to people who have lived here for generations, as well as the environmental violence that's been being done to the land as we experience rapid growth and expansion, and the loss of, over the past 10 years, the loss of 25% of the African American population in what was historically a predominantly African American community.
Right.
So the manifestations of the problem have evolved. It really did start out with, we can't afford for more of our, particularly young men, but young people to be dying in the streets. And what are the underlying causes? It's not just take the guns out of their hands, although that's important. What is it that's creating the cycles of violence, and how do we respond to those? And those underlying causes haven't gone away. They're just creating different manifestations of the problem today. Like I said, displacement in particular, and the lack of respect for the culture and heritage of the city among the folks who are moving in.
Okay.
Which some people would be loath to call violence, but I'm pretty comfortable doing so, because that's part of what permits people to dismiss those who are still here with stories and heritage and a lifetime and generations of contribution, as well as legitimate needs around housing that are very readily dismissed because they're not the tax base that is growing in the city, and therefore not the people that anyone sees themselves accountable to.
Yeah. I mean, I think
is that getting too wonky? You'll have to forgive me.
No.
Llewellyn probably told you I'm a little bit of a policy nerd, and I tend to drift into that sometimes.
I love it. We would definitely have very lengthy conversations. Yeah, I actually was out in Oakland like about a year ago, a little less than a year
Yeah.
ago, and a friend of mine who lives there and works for one of the nonprofits in the area, I forget, Culture Strike maybe.
Cool.
Um,
Oh, they do the artwork. Is
they
that
do
right?
the art stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So
Them
and
and
we were
Design Action
talking about,
Collective are amazing. Yeah.
yeah, they're doing great work. And we were talking about this issue, and we were walking around kind of
Yeah.
downtown Oakland, and she was showing me kind of exactly what you were just saying, where the gentrification is coming in, and you know the buildings and the culture and everything that's been there for forever is becoming irrelevant.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why you personally, why did you want to try to fix this problem?
So, like I said, I don't think I have a friend, her name's Leah Skoll, and she worked for decades with sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me the last time we hung out, I'm not convinced that anyone does work in social justice without having a direct touch with it. So she was like, I was never a sex worker, but many of us who work with sex workers were victims of domestic violence or sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
Many women are who never do that work, but she said often that's the trigger that leads to this. I never set out to do, I often say I never set out to do peace work. My passion has always been racial justice.
Okay.
And it was the church naming that they wanted to play a role in creating peace that led to this. But the fact of the matter is, one of the most formative life experiences I had when I was in college was that that my college boyfriend shot and killed his best friend
Wow.
on our campus. And so I lost a friend who died, and I lost my boyfriend to the prison system. And there are all sorts of layers of what was going on there around the repression of LGBT inclusion in the church, around access to guns, around mental health issues and shame related to that. And foundationally, it was about violence being the last resort for people without hope, right? Um, and so I think for me, there's always been something in me that has wished there were a quick fix to that reality. And the longer I've tried to look for that quick fix, whether it be gun control, which I'm a big advocate for, or expansion of mental health services, or addressing the systemic racism in the way that that we have our conversations about gun access, or there's never one piece of the puzzle, right? There's so many elements to addressing why violence happens that it kind of makes sense that I would have ended up doing work that is trying to address all of those strands around holistic health, around public policy, around access to weapons, around the ways in which drug policies are designed to break apart Black families and Black communities, and the repercussions that has for our urban centers. That there's no one strand that's enough to address issues of violence, in the same way that there was no one thing that could have stopped that shooting all of those years ago. It was a whole collection of things that were left unaddressed. And so in some ways, I think it makes sense that I would have ended up doing this work. I found myself puzzled by it because people kept saying, hey, Shonda, you're a peace person. Let's talk about peace. And I was like, I'm not. I'm only doing this because the church made me. But as I look back on it, it becomes clear that I think my own story led to this moment in some ways that I didn't realize as it was unfolding.
Sorry, the dogs are barking, so I'm just putting in a headset. So
Sure.
There, but I am listening intently to what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's just dogs. So when you I'm trying to think of the way I want to ask this. So, when you decided, I mean, did you wake up one day and you decided, you know what, I'm just going to form the Peace Center and, you know, everything magically happened? Or was it a slower process? And, you know, how did you know what the steps were to take in the beginning?
So I think some of this is just life experience. Like you said, you've been in the nonprofit world. And I think for any of us in the nonprofit world, there's a certain amount of heartbreak related to the lack of collaboration and how it limits our ability to fulfill those much bigger dreams and visions. There was a very tangible reality that was pressing in, which was I was pastoring a tiny congregation with a very big building that was falling down around their ears. They had named their dream for their contribution to their neighborhood being creating peace in the midst of violence. And in the first few years of me pastoring there, recognizing that that was something the church cared about, I had started building up relationships with organizations like the Ella Baker Center that at the time had the Silence the Violence campaign, and had begun to get to know Belinda from Project Darius, who, like I said, her son was shot in our neighborhood, and during his memorial service, not knowing that she was going to say this, she got up and said, I'm going to establish a foundation in my son's memory. Because he always extended compassion and kindness to everybody. And I want to carry on his legacy so that no one in our neighborhood ever needs to turn to violence again. I had started to get to know folks from the Green Youth Arts and Media Center, United Roots, who were providing opportunities for youth in our neighborhood to learn how to produce hip-hop videos and express themselves creatively and build up entrepreneurial skills so that one youth at a time, they would have opportunities besides gang life, besides violence-laden and life-shortening options that were the only ones they saw. And so those kinds of relationships on behalf of a church that wanted to be about the work of peace but didn't have the energy to do very much were kind of where the idea came from. So it was kind of a perfect storm of, we had this big building that we didn't know how to make use of and we didn't know how to maintain. We had a little bit of a vision but no energy, and there were folks doing amazing work who were out there on the front lines by themselves, constantly at risk of burnout. And I had a lifetime of experience with nonprofits not knowing how to work with each other. And so it really was those four elements that this kind of came together. And I didn't just say, so therefore, let's go and do it. I ran it by the church. We had some conversations. We nuanced it a lot. We had you may call it a focus group, but every single one of the people in that group ended up becoming a partner.
Okay.
So we had an initial conversation with a dozen organizations to say, would this be useful to you and what would it need to look like? And then we had, the moment I knew it was actually going to be a thing was when I said to some of those folks, so how do we launch this? And some people came up with great ideas. And a couple of folks said, we would like to help you make that happen. So we had a team doing it. It wasn't just people saying, okay, now go forth and do that. Mm-hmm. It was people saying, we believe in this vision enough that we'd like to help manifest that with you. And so our launch weekend was a whole day of workshops and events that the whole community was invited to, followed by a panel discussion, an intergenerational panel discussion from leaders who are doing peace work in several different ways, and a concert for peace with spoken word and hip hop that came from some of our partners who were really doing some cutting edge work. So we had, and a film screening of a documentary about a multiracial community that rose up against their slumlord in
Wow.
East Oakland, and how they created beloved community in their process of resisting the horrible treatment they were getting, and how they held the city accountable in the ways in which they worked together. So we had this whole weekend of programming over MLK weekend of 2012, and it came together because the partners all threw down together to create that experience. It was scrappy, it was rough-edged, it was imperfect, it was in spaces that were freezing because some of the spaces in our building didn't have functioning heat. And as we get older, some of our partners who are used to cleaner, prettier stuff keep saying, we can't wait until this building's beautiful and perfect. And there's some of me that says, yes, people on the margins deserve nice stuff, and we don't tend to function out of that assumption. And so I'm excited about that. And yet I don't want us to lose the grittiness that makes it a welcoming space to the folks who deserve a space of welcome. So I don't want to tip over into so professional that the folks who helped make this a reality no longer feel at home.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
that's kind of what I'm thinking through as we move forward.
I think that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, grit sometimes feels like home.
Yeah.
You know, it's true. And gosh, I mean, I love the idea that you've brought up, that you don't have to do this alone. I think a lot of people are so overwhelmed by the idea of doing anything, because it's just like, well, it's going to just be me. Nobody will care about what I'm doing.
Right.
And it's a really scary place to be in the beginning. And just finding that group of people who speak the same language, you know, even if they don't have the exact same vision, there's still a way to like build, you know, pull from that community and move your idea forward.
Yep. And I think the phase we're in right now it's a little bit more of a bicycle wheel where all the spokes lead to me. And over time, we're trying to move to more of a web where they are supporting each other. And that's beginning to happen, where they're showing up for each other, where they're showing up for each other's trainings and learning from each other. And so the Kingian nonviolence work is showing up in the yoga programs, and the meditation work is showing up in the food distribution. And I'm so eager for that to become fully who we are. I think I'm so excited about that possibility.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because that's what makes it last in the long term, right?
Yeah.
I mean, kind of back to your point in the beginning, you sort of want to work yourself out of a job, right?
Exactly. So, That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I've said I've got 5 more years in me, and then I should be able to walk away. That's my dream. And you were saying, you know, we don't have to do it alone. So you are welcome to edit this out. This is just kind of an aside for you. That's actually what my next book's about. So my most recent book is Pre-Post Racial America. It's a multiracial look at issues of faith and justice related to race, and the stories of individuals' experiences across a number of racial ethnic backgrounds. But my upcoming book is, we just changed the title. I'm going to give you the title I remember. I'm not sure it's the actual title.
I'll hold you to it.
Yeah, exactly. Transforming Communities, How People Like You Are Healing Their Neighborhoods. And so it's in some ways, the least sexy way of describing it is it's a collection of case studies of regular folks who recognized a problem in their community, and knowing that there are a number of tools needed in those kinds of situations, focusing on one tool that each group used, whether that be assets-based community development or using a truth commission model, kind of like they used in South Africa during the end of apartheid, or faith-rooted organizing, or participatory research models. All of these being things that regular folks can use to affect change in their neighborhoods. And in all of those instances, it wasn't fancy, brilliant, super highly educated, super rich, anything like that. And it was never one person. Sometimes one person had the vision and they checked around to see if anybody was excited about that as well to join with them. But it was never the one superhero, right? It was always a group of folks saying, wait a second, we need to do something about this. How do we go about that? So yeah, the next book is very much about how regular folks together can be the transformation we need. And I really, in the midst of what is hard about the national scene right now, for us to throw ourselves into building up those alternative communities, those beloved communities, as Martin Luther King would say, is an act of resistance, but it's also modeling what we want this nation to be. And I think that matters a lot right now. And for folks who are in places that don't have the critical mass of people who are organizing for that, for them to get to see that it's possible reminds them that they're not alone. I'm struck by that because a lot of donors to the Oakland Peace Center are California-based, but we also have donors in Iowa and Kansas and North Carolina and places where it is hard to do that beloved community work because there are systems of government actively trying to shut that down.
Right.
And so I like to think that we're offering them a little bit of encouragement in the midst of what feels very isolating right now. And so we do the work of the Oakland Peace Center because Oakland needs it, but I think we also do the work of the Oakland Peace Center because the nation needs it and needs it now more than ever.
You know, it's funny that you say that you mentioned the people in the pockets of the world and of the US that don't have those groups to join up with, or, you know, they feel very alone. That's when I was trying to decide what to do with my program with Engage. I was just, you know, I was like, should I do something within, I'm in New Jersey, should I do something within this area? And then I was like, you know what, no, I want it online. So I want those people in Kansas or in wherever can access the group of people that are trying to do the same work. And so they don't feel so alone, and so that they're getting the resources that they need. So I mean, I love it. I can't wait to read your book. When is it coming out?
It comes out in October.
Okay.
I'm super excited about it because they just landed on the cover while I was on vacation last week, and I'm almost giddy. Yeah, I'm really, really pleased.
That's exciting. Congratulations. I know it's not easy to write a book, that's for sure.
While you're doing other stuff, that is
right.
Even when you're not doing other stuff, it's hard. Yeah, I imagine.
No, it takes a lot of focus, and you're telling other people's stories, and so that's also another level of responsibility,
of accountability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think this is where the journalism training from long ago is actually pretty useful to me. You're working on a book as well, is that right? It sounds like it might be around similar themes, which is exciting to me.
Right. So the other thing that I do in my life is storytelling and personal storytelling. So helping, not so much me telling stories of other people, but helping people tell their personal stories.
Yeah.
And so the book is going to be, you know, you and all these other people that I'm interviewing and using pictures and, you know, your stories and putting that together.
Pictures is a really good idea.
Yeah, like I don't want it to be text heavy. I want it to, I'll send you a link to the stories I did for, the roller derby team we did a Nevertheless She Persisted campaign.
That's awesome.
The stories are mind-blowing, and I can't tell you like what a great response we got from them.
Yeah.
Like we just were posting them on our page and everybody was just blown away. And we created t-shirts and we donated, you know, much more money than we thought we would to a local organization.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But yeah, so I'll send you a link to that because you'll see kind of the style. It's kind of like Humans of New York style stories of, you know, and it's just so empowering to hear other people's stories and not have them told by somebody else, and just have them told by the person with editing, of course, because otherwise it might get, you know, I have to make the story flow. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing, and that's you know, I'm in the short term using the stories that I'm collecting on social media to promote well, one, to promote my program,
Yeah, of
because I
course.
do want people to actually get involved, because I think it's really
I do
important.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, but also just to promote, the work that people that aren't necessarily getting a lot of press at this point, or and have compelling stories that everybody around the world needs to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping this will eventually be a global movement of
Yeah.
I call them engagers, people
Yes.
people who are just like, yeah, you know what? I know I'm working full time and I've got a busy life, but I can do this little piece. I can do a photography project in my church, or I can
Yes.
do, something small, or I can do something giant, like start the Oakland Peace Center, or something like that. So,
And I couldn't have done it by myself.
of course,
I would never have tried to do it by myself.
yeah,
And anytime I feel a little too alone, I shift things around to fix that.
that's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great piece of advice, actually, or a thought point.
Yeah.
Um, I am. I can relate to that in the sense of I work from home, and I was trying to launch this by myself and was
Yeah.
like, wow, this really isn't working by myself. Like, I'm staring at my computer.
Yeah.
So I joined a group online of women who are, heart-centered businesses.
Yeah.
And that it means
Oh, that's
everything.
great. It does,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It means everything. So here's my question for you now.
Yeah.
What have you learned about yourself in doing this?
My most recent learning, so the learning that I'm pretty sure everybody learns at some point or learns over and over is everything I've done in my life was leading to this moment. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so sometimes it feels like I'm uniquely situated to do this work. No, I'm doing this work because of all the life experiences. And some of those are things like the tragic stuff that has gone on, but some of it's, I worked in Congress. I worked for a national religious liberty nonprofit. I got trained as a pastor. I've worked in policy advocacy work, but I've also been forced through the pastoral work to recognize that the well-being of the individual affects the well-being of the community, and that that's not a policy thing. So all of these things that have contributed to my life have helped me recognize the impact of these big meta-national things, and also the profound significance of the individual well-being. Things like working on labor justice campaigns, but working on them as a person of faith, has helped me recognize that the issue of worker justice isn't just about addressing the needs of the worker. It's about recognizing both the needs and the gifts of the person who happens to also be a worker. And so I think that really shapes the work of the Oakland Peace Center, but it's because those experiences have shaped me. So everything from my background, even the stuff that doesn't seem like it's relevant, even having been a door-to-door knife salesperson, has actually positioned me to do this work, right? So everything
Wow.
from my life is part of this work, if only because being a door-to-door knife salesperson forces you to get really good at putting people at ease very quickly.
Yeah, I would. That's a whole nother call. Like, I feel like we have a whole nother story there. We might have to get drinks sometime and
Billy
hear it.
Graham's
Tell me that.
first job was as a vacuum cleaner salesman. If you think that didn't position him to be an effective evangelist, you're kidding yourself.
Right.
Right? So all of the stuff that comes before shaped me for this work. The thing that I've learned recently, and I'm still in the midst of learning, is that it's okay that I'm not good at everything.
Mm.
So in the early days of a nonprofit, the ED usually has to do all of the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The administrative stuff, the fundraising stuff, the legal stuff, the program stuff, the relational stuff. And some of that I'm better at than other things, and I'm in the process of figuring out how to rearrange to create space for someone to do the stuff I'm not good at. And for a while, I was trying to grit my teeth and say, I need to do all of it, because that's just how it is in the early days. But, 5 years in is no longer the early days. And this is maybe kind of because of my Asian conditioning, but I'm having to learn how to give myself grace and forgiveness for not being able to do all of the things, and to say, it's okay. It's okay that just because I have the vision, just because I see where we're going to be 20 years from now, doesn't mean I'm going to be good at all the stuff that we need to do to get there. So that's been a big, in the past few months, that's been the new learning for me.
I think that's a powerful lesson to learn. It's it's sort of back, at least this is what I'm relating it to. It's sort of back to the ego thing, right? I can do it, and if I don't do it all, then I'm gonna look.
It is, and at the same time, I think it's also wrapped up in some gender stuff. To be taken early in my career, I learned that to be taken seriously, I needed to do all of the things. My male counterparts could just do the vision work, and that was enough. That was never going to be enough for me as a woman. And so early on, I learned, no, you have to be able to do all of the things in order to be taken anywhere near as seriously as your male counterparts. And maybe this is more true of pastors, but there are plenty of male pastors who can't do the administrative work well, who all they have is the vision and the charisma. And that's enough. And I've got tons of vision and charisma, just as much as any man, but that was never going to be enough. And so now I'm at a point in my career where I'm giving myself permission to only be as good as a man,